For today, so I'm sure some more will join us. But I think in the interest of time, we've got lots to cover with you all. We'll get started. So a big welcome, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us on today's session. So we're here for the first of a two-part training on gender equality in capital markets. And as I said earlier, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we're starting. We love to know what organization you're joining us from and where you're here with us from. So thank you, a big thank you today to the four host organizations that we have. So we have the Corporate Governance Professional Association of Ukraine, the Moldova Stock Exchange, the Armenia Stock Exchange, and the Georgian Stock Exchange as well. So a really unique opportunity, I think, today to bring together a number of markets, a number of companies in different locations. So we hope that this will provide a good opportunity to share what you're doing. So feel free to exchange in the chat if you'd like to share a little bit about what you're doing in your location and organization, and I'm sure that will be really beneficial to everyone here today. But without further ado, I'm delighted to say that we have the IFC, or the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group, represented today by Elena Voloshina. So Elena is the country manager for Ukraine with the IFC, and she oversees IFC's investment and advisory in Ukraine, really working on that private sector development and promoting sustainable economic growth. So Elena will give us a little bit of an opener. So a big thank you, Elena, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where everyone is located. I'm very proud and very glad to join you today. We would like to thank the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges for inviting IFC to deliver the opening remarks. And we're also very happy to have partnership with the stock exchanges from Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, as well as our long-term partner in Ukraine, a Corporate Governance Professional Association, for hosting this event. IFC is proud to be a partner with stock exchanges and professional associations globally to promote equitable participation and representation of women across capital markets. It is part of the World Bank Group Gender Strategy for 2024-2030, which focuses on empowering women. The strategy has three objectives. First one is to end gender-based violence. Second one is to invest in human capital and expand economic opportunities. And the third one is to promote women leadership. Women's participation is essential for building resilient, competitive, inclusive, and sustainable economy. IFC has conducted a research of 2,000 companies listed on various stock exchanges. And an interesting finding from that research is that 1% increase in female management participation correlates to 0.2% of CO2 emissions. Yet we all know that women are still underrepresented on most boards. That is why IFC developed the special Women on Boards and business leadership training program in partnership with other people and financing from the Stock Exchange of Luxembourg. IFC itself pays a lot of attention to inclusivity and making sure that women are adequately represented. IFC nominee list of IFC nominee directors, which used to have only 20% of women several years ago, is now 50% women-led. We also do yearly Ring the Bell initiatives at various stock exchanges, including in my home country. In Ukraine, both Lisa and myself, we represent IFC in an association which is called Women on Boards. There is an ongoing debate within the women community whether to have a quota for women on boards. I personally am not a big fan of quotas in any shape or form, but there is some discussion going on in Ukraine that maybe we should have a quota. I also participate in the nomination committee as observer for selecting directors to the boards of state-owned companies and state-owned banks. And as nomination committee, we always make sure that women are adequately represented. But if you look at the number of applicants, it's certainly male dominated. So we women need to be a little more active, proactive. So the workshop is a 3 days event, and it basically focuses on what, how, and where. What actions and tools are we going to apply in order to have more representation in capital markets? How we're going to measure the impact and the value created by women, and where and how are we going to communicate these results? So I wish you a successful and productive workshop. I'm sure we're going to be a lot more empowered, a lot stronger, and our voice is going to be even stronger and heard more loudly. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elena. I think that's some fantastic context for today's session and already introduces several concepts we'll be getting into later. So hopefully there'll be some good follow through on that, but we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So great. With that, I will kick off with a little bit of an introduction from the SSE team just to explain a little bit more about what we're going to be covering today. So today's training is looking really at that interface of gender equality and capital markets. And as many of you might already feel, gender equality and finance can be both a sensitive as well as a complex topic. So rather than pretending that that complexity doesn't exist, what we aim to do today is to better understand it and to identify means of moving forwards. And so today's training is looking particularly at understanding those complexities. In our second session, which we'll be doing on Monday, we'll get into more action-oriented mechanisms for advancing gender equality and addressing these complexities. So as I've mentioned, we've got a two-part course with our second part taking place on Monday, and we have live facilitation for these 2-hour sessions. And we do also have live Q&A throughout the training. So we do really encourage you to make use of the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have throughout. So please use the Q&A box that you'll have on the bottom of your screen there if you have any particular questions for the team. And that will help us just to track those questions and provide the answers to them. And if you want to, you're very welcome to share in the chat any context or any comments that you might have on the content as we move along. So please do make use of that. And we always love to know who's with us and where you're joining from and what your perspective is. So really encourage you to participate. And on that front, we'll be using another couple of different tools to do some engagement in the session. So we'll be using Menti and polls. So also really encourage you to take part in those as well. And finally, for taking part in the 2 training sessions, you're eligible to receive a completion certificate as well. So you'll have to complete a feedback survey, which we'll share with you at the end of Monday's session. So we'll explain more about that then. So just to recap, I think I've mentioned this already, but as you'll note, you are on mute as participants, but please don't take that we don't want you to participate and engage. So as I said, make sure to use those chat and Q&A functions if you have anything that you'd like to share through those routes with us. So just to say a little bit more about who's going to be joining us on today's training. So firstly, you have myself and my colleague Landon from the SSE team, who will be delivering the training from the SSE side. And we're also joined by our colleague Anna Pashalishvili, apologies, who joins us from the UN Women Central Asia and Europe office, and is a program specialist focusing on women's entrepreneurship acceleration. So perhaps I'll just hand over to you, Anna, quickly, just to say a quick hello as well.
Thank you, Fiona, a lot. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. The session today is a bit unusual because we have different stock exchanges together and different partners, which is great because we've been individually engaging with most of you, on a country level. But I think this is the first time when we get together as a from regional perspective, to say so. The idea came from the beginning because, as Fiona introduced me, I work at the UN Women Europe and Central Asia Regional Office, which covers 16 countries in the region. And a very important part of our work is to make sure that different countries where we work, different offices, different partners have access to each other's knowledge, experience, and networking. So we were really glad to join forces with UNSCE, IFC, and create this space to bring you together. We will have another group with other countries also next week. And we want this to be really the beginning of cross-country or cross-regional cooperation. And it will be the program is very intensive, so intensive and interesting learnings. But also, let's do our best to get to know each other, to network, and to figure out to make some plans on the future cooperation. Thank you very much. I'll be coming in some time back, but we'll be here throughout the webinar. And thank you again, Fiona and London, for this convening and everybody who came to be part of it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Anna. We really appreciate you joining us and bringing the expertise and the perspective from what you've been working on in your region as well. So fantastic to have you with us. We'll also be joined later in the training session by a guest speaker. So we have Harry joining us from the Bloomberg team. And I hope that Harry, I think, will help us to really bring to life the work that financial sector firms are doing on gender equality as well. So he'll be speaking to us more about Bloomberg's Gender Equality Index. Okay, great. So gender equality, I think, we've already established as a complex topic, and it should be seen as such. And perhaps if you think it's simple, then maybe you haven't thought enough about it yet. So that's something I think we'll hopefully get into more today. But to guide us through this complexity, we've broken this training program down into 4 clear steps that both individuals and organizations can use as they address this complexity and to consider how to enhance gender equality in the operations and processes. So in our part 1 training today, we're going to be looking at the first 2 steps that you'll see in that circle diagram there, all around preparation and alignment. And here we're focusing on what gender equality is, why it's important, and providing an overview of the main standards and guidelines that can guide performance on this topic. And then in our part 2 session next week, we'll be digging into action. So looking at these second 2 steps all around implementation and communication. Great, and that just shows you a breakdown there of the full program. So as I said, we have these 4 modules, and these have been developed to really walk you through these 4 steps. So an important note, I think, here is that this is an ongoing process. So once you've started perhaps communicating on your gender equality program, of course, this doesn't mean that you're finished, job done. And like many sustainability related topics, this, of course, is going to be a continual process of improvement. So whilst we present things in a nice sequential order in our training, of course, we recognise it's likely that you're going to be working across these 4 areas in unison as you move along on this topic. And so to focus on what we're aiming to achieve today, our first learning objective is to understand why action is needed for enhanced gender equality. And then secondly, we're going to be looking at what the tools are that you can use to really help you to improve. And so just to show you how that agenda breaks down during today's session, so we have the sort of fairly even split of time across those 2 segments, and we'll take a short 5-minute break in the middle as well. Okay, so that's a little bit of an overview from my side, but to get us started, we'd love to do our first quick Menti exercise with you, just to get everyone used to using Menti, which is something we'll come back to through the session, as we mentioned. So Landon, thanks Landon, has just shared the link in the chat with you there to access the Menti. So if you follow that link, it will take you through to our first question with you. And I'll also share the screen because that'll give you a few more options as well for some different ways to join us if you'd like to do that. So our first question, once you get into Menti, is just to get a sense from everyone here as to what really your current understanding and comfort is on these topics. So we'd like to just get a sense from this scale of maybe not at all comfortable to very comfortable already. of how confident you feel at the moment about your knowledge of gender equality and global markets, discussing this topic with others, and maybe how likely you would be at present to take action to improve gender equality in your organisation. So just take a moment to have a little think and let us know where you think you're at. And if for any reason you do have any trouble joining Menti at the link Landon has shared, another option that you have is to go to menti.com directly at the top of the screen there, and you can enter that 8-digit code that you see there as well. So another way to join us if you need to. Okay, so thanks to those who've taken part already. So I think at the moment it looks like we already feel relatively confident, I would say, but perhaps more confident about discussing the topic with others and taking actions in your organisation, and some feeling like there's a little bit more to learn about the connection between gender equality and global markets. So no problems, of course, and understandable at this point in time. Great, thanks everyone for sharing that. So I'd recommend keeping Menti open in the background because we'll come back to use this again at the same link later in the session. But I'll just take us back now to the slide presentation. So really now moving on from that, we're going to start with the first area of content. And this is all around wanting to understand why it's important to enhance gender equality and looking at that connection to finance. And so this first unit is really going to focus on that area. And so, as I said, we're going to look at this connection. So there's 3 main areas to this unit, narrowing into the topic a bit more in each area. So first, we're going to start with the case for action. We'll then narrow down a little bit more and look at market trends for this. And then we're going to think specifically in the final section about the terminology that will help us to communicate about gender equality in the right language. So firstly, starting with prepare and why gender equality matters. I mean, hopefully I think this is somewhat obvious, but we use some data here just to try and make the points a little clearer. So to get started, it's important to highlight that equality between genders is indeed a human right, and this has been something that is well established in international guidance. And it's widely documented that women and girls experience adverse impacts of business activities differently and disproportionately to other genders. And they also face additional barriers in seeking access to effective remedies. And moreover, because of multiple forms of discrimination, different women and girls may be affected differently by business activities, depending on their age, their colour, caste, class, ethnicity, religion, language, literacy. The list really does go on. And this can also include other factors such as, their sexual orientation, gender identity, perhaps disability, or perhaps based on migration or indigenous or minority status. So that's a very long list of aspects that can influence how someone is treated. But what we really want to say here is that, of course, as we've mentioned already, this is very complex and it's very much interconnected between all of these factors. And so the document that you can see on the screen at the moment is the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And these are global authoritative standards to prevent, mitigate, and remediate business-related adverse impacts from human rights. And we've flagged on this slide a few of these principles that help us to understand the obligations that businesses have. So the first principle we highlight here is number 14, which indicates the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights, and that this applies to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, etc. And the second principle we highlight is number 16, and this encourages businesses to express their commitment to meet these human rights through a statement of policy that should have certain characteristics. And so you can read more about this in the document on your screen, and we'll also share this in the chat with you as well. It's worth saying as well, I think we haven't mentioned this so far, Landon has shared in the chat though, that you can download and access this slide handout if you'd like to follow along or to click on any of the links to the resources we've mentioned. So Landon has shared with you the page in the chat, and thanks for sharing the principles as well there, Landon. So if you go to that page, our event page, at the bottom of it, you'll find in the resources section this slide presentation, as well as the guest speakers we have today. So do feel free to check out these links as well after the session. And so just to highlight the two further principles, we have Principle 20, which highlights that to verify whether to assess human rights impacts, businesses should track the effectiveness of their response by using sex disaggregated data collected in line with human rights-based approaches, and that they should have indicators that they develop in consultation with affected people and gender experts. So we're going to discuss this in more detail in part 2 on communications, but it's important to also recognise that even if this data isn't currently made public, it is still important to disaggregate it and to collect it so that you're able to make better decisions internally and identify issues as they arise. And the final principle to highlight here is about the important role of communication. And so according to this, businesses should be prepared to communicate externally, particularly when concerns are raised, perhaps by affected stakeholders. So businesses should be looking to communicate adequate and easily accessible information to stakeholders regularly. And this should really be responsive to issues of gender discrimination and the different impacts experienced by women. So I think what's important to highlight from a financial perspective here is that in addition to, of course, this being the right thing to do and having a positive impact on society, organizations should be considering the repercussions associated with violating human rights of employees, partners, and stakeholders. And of course, there are policy and legal risks and reputational risks as well that are associated with these issues. And that's important for these to be considered as well within your processes and disclosures. So it's also important to note that meeting the Sustainable Development Goals depends on the equality of genders. You might recognize here the image as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And gender equality is on its own one of these 17 goals agreed to by all UN member states, but it also contributes to many of the other SDGs. And the SDGs really represent an ambitious attempt to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve lives and well-being of everyone. So as I've said, we have a goal, SDG 5, specifically focusing on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. But aspects of gender equality also appear in the targets and indicators in total of 10 of the other SDGs as well. So if you'd like to see how gender equality links to these different SDGs, you could take a look at the annex of the SSE's guidance on gender equality for exchanges, which we'll share with you as well. Okay, so I think we've established here that increasing gender equality is very much a globally agreed goal, but what exactly does increasing gender equality do for society overall? And so studies have shown that when we have more equality of genders in society, we also see lower levels of violence, greater economic productivity, and increased resilience against financial and environmental crises. And so I want to remind you that by gender equality, we don't want to imply we need more women than men, but that equality means that both women and men are represented and have the same level of power and are both heard and understood equally. And however, to achieve equality, in many cases, we do need to provide extra support to the less represented gender, which in many cases today is women. But to give you an example of the extent of impact that gender equality or inequality currently has on society, a study by the World Bank estimated that a loss in human capital wealth due to gender equality was at over $160 trillion. And another study also showed that equal participation of male and female entrepreneurs could boost global GDP by approximately 3 to 6%. So again, there's some more links in your handout that you can see on the slide here if you'd like to read about this in more detail. So overall, by promoting gender equality of both genders, it's been found to have both positive social, environmental, economic, and business benefits. And if we narrow in a little bit deeper into the benefits that companies can find from enhancing gender equality, we can also see some more particular benefits for businesses as well. So firstly, companies with higher levels of diversity, both in terms of gender and ethnicity, at executive level are often found to show higher performance than their less diverse counterparts, both in terms of profitability and long-term value creation measures. And different genders also have different attitudes to risk. So if our decision makers, perhaps our board and our leadership team, are more diverse across our organizations and programs, this can lead to a more balanced decision-making process. And different genders experience the world differently and therefore have different views and ideas that can contribute to the company's goals and to better innovation. We also see that those companies that have policies to support and promote gender equality are better able to attract and retain talent. We're also seeing a growth in gender lens investing and mandates for gender lens investing, which is something we're going to talk about more across the training program, have increased from 100 million US dollars to now 2.4 billion over a 4-year period between 2014 and 2018. So overall, companies with more diverse boards and senior management demonstrate better ESG performance, including having more ethical business practices, enhanced workplace and workforce policies, and stronger community relations as well. So hopefully lots of potential benefits for businesses to gain from taking action here. So we'll look now just at one of the many studies on this topic, just to see a little bit more detail about the benefits that diverse companies are seeing. And this data comes from a study by F&P Analytics, which is an independent research and advisory division of foreign policy. And the study looks particularly at industries that are traditionally male-dominated, and it analysed over 2,300 publicly listed companies across the world, and more than 160 in-depth one-on-one interviews and follow-up surveys were done. So overall, the study finds that companies with more women on their boards have on average a higher profit, greater transparency, and higher social ratings. So looking at each of those 3 areas. So firstly, on profitability, the study found that companies with the highest percentage of women in management were on average 47% more profitable than those with the lowest. And these findings are consistent with other evidence that promoting gender diversity can benefit a business's bottom line. So, for example, in another study by the International Labour Organization, women interviewed for this research detailed how they were leading their organizations on new revenue generating paths, advancing innovation, and advocating for harm reducing practices, and overall contributing to increasing transparency and building stakeholder trust. And secondly, on transparency, so building trust across stakeholder groups, including employees, consumers, regulators, and investors, is vital for industries that are working to evolve their business models, improve regulatory compliance and performance, and respond to the changing needs of their consumers. And this study found that companies with a higher percentage of women on their boards were typically more transparent in terms of ESG information disclosure. And particularly companies with at least one woman on their board were found to be 17% more transparent than those with no female board members. And finally, in terms of corporate social responsibility, the analysis found a positive correlation between gender diversity on corporate boards and companies' social and sustainability performance ratings. And women interviewed for this study provided numerous accounts of their efforts to protect safety and labour rights, integrate community development into business strategy, and build local capacity and empower women. So hopefully, as I said, just one study, but starting to evidence some of those potentially really significant business benefits we can see from improving gender equality. And so remember also, we discussed a few slides ago that diversity and equality can have important societal and environmental impacts as well. And another interesting aspect of this same research was that equality not only had an impact within the company, but also for the environment where it operates. For example, more diverse boards were more likely to reduce emissions, they were more water efficient, and they were more energy efficient than their peers with less diverse boards. And in your handout, you can also find some extra slides giving you a couple more studies if you'd like to dive into a bit of detail on this. And Landon's also shared with you in the chat another publication that came out from the IFC on gender responsive climate governance and the role of women leaders as well. So we recommend taking a look at that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that first section, and I'll hand over to Landon now to start us on landscape.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona, and good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Great to have everyone here with us. So now that we've had a look to, or a chance to look at kind of the case for gender equality, we can narrow in a bit more and look at the state of the market. So in the next section, we're going to hone in on some key terms used when discussing gender equality. Now, before we do that, we have a question for you. So how long do you think it will take for equality? And where are we at now? So if you can go back to the Menti, I see Fiona just shared the Menti link again in the chat. Relatively simple question. How many years do you expect to achieve gender equality globally? So you can answer between 0 and 500. It's increments of 10. And I'll give folks a few seconds to input and answer. We'll see if anyone knows the answer we're using as well. Okay. See, a couple people are pretty optimistic, perhaps with putting in about 10 or 20 years. I wish that was the case. I think we all do. But without giving away the answer, it's not 10 or 20 years. Okay, a few more seconds and then we'll move to the answer. Okay, I think some folks were close to the answer, so we can reveal the answer now. So unfortunately, it is still a very long time before we'll see gender equality on this current trajectory. So almost 300 years or 285 years before we're expected to achieve gender equality, and that's according to a report by UN Women. I will note that there's some other estimates for this based on how you measure equality. For example, the WEF or World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report indicated it may take 130 years, so a little bit better, a bit more optimistic, but still quite far off. And we're not seeing any indication for equality of genders and people that will be achieved in our lifetime. Now we'll go to the next Menti, and you may be familiar with an American study that went viral not too long ago, indicating that fewer large companies are run by women than by men, specifically men named John, a sure indicator that the glass ceiling remains firmly in place in corporate America. And I'm sure if you looked at other countries, you'd probably find similar cases like that. So among chief executives of S&P 500 firms, for each woman, there's 4 men named John, Robert, William, or James. That study was, as I mentioned, was just for the USA. So the question is, how do you think your region or your market, what do you think that percent of CEOs of listed companies in your market or region are women? Okay, we'll leave it there. Unfortunately, we don't have an exact right answer for this unique market or region that we brought together today, because for Europe, there's about 7% female CEOs, but for Western Asia, that's only 3%. And then, I will note, we'll come to this in a minute, but the SSE will have a forthcoming report that's more specific to your region. And then we'll go to the next Menti for what percent of board seats are held by women. And we'll use Europe as the region, which I know is not quite exact, but let's just say for Europe, for that case study, what do you think the percent of board seats are held by women? Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, we'll reveal the answer here. But as mentioned, apologies, we don't have as exact of an answer as we want for your specific market or region. But in Europe, it's 37%. But from the research we're actually doing now for that will be released next year, this number is actually a lot lower for kind of the Central Asia region and Eastern Europe region. So, as mentioned, we have a report coming out that's specific to your markets. So please stay tuned for that. And apologies, we don't have the data for 2024 there, but we'll have data for next year for 2025 specific to your market and your region. So look out for that. And we'll go back to the slides now. So the next piece is about some of SSE publications. These are the publications I mentioned that we do every year. So in collaboration with IFC, UN Women, and other partners, we've worked together to provide markets with an overview or benchmark of current progress on gender and leadership of listed companies. And we'll dive into some of those reports in 1 second. I'll move the slides forward. So yeah, here's just the covers of some of the reports. So as mentioned, this next year for 2025, we'll have a gender equality and corporate leadership report focused on your region. So stay tuned for that. So you can see the first section. This covers just the G20. We'll also share some links to the publications in the chat so that you can review it in your own time. And all these reports can also be found on the SSE publication page. This data can serve as a good benchmark for exchanges and other relevant institutions in their efforts to promote women's full and effective participation in and equal opportunities for corporate leadership positions. And we'll zoom in a bit more here. So you see the G20 numbers here. It's about 22% average. There is an overall positive trend line. You see all these green numbers. Almost all are green. Euronext, I'll note, is an exception, but Euronext, as you see, is at 44, so quite close to parity there. So that -1 is less of a concern, but it'd still be great to see these green trends continue. But the top 5 exchanges in the G20 are located in France, UK, Italy, Australia, and Canada. So going back to the France or Euronext Paris example, France does have a regulatory requirement for women on boards, requiring 40% of boards to be made of women. However, even though the percent of women on boards is among the highest in the world, France's female executive leadership pipeline is not as strong. So for that reason, in May 2021, the French Parliament voted to introduce gender quotas for executive leadership, 30% minimum for either gender by 2027 or 40% by 2030. So we're actually going to come back to this quota discussion throughout this webinar. It's something that our colleague noted at the start of the session, I believe with Ukraine considering quotas, and we'll talk a bit in a case study actually about some of the pros and cons of different efforts firms and exchanges can make in trying to reach gender equality and advance gender equality. So you do see some, as mentioned, moving backwards, but I think it's fair to say we still have a long way to travel. For example, only 3 markets in the G20 have no all-male boards among their top 100 issuers. TSX in Canada, ASX Australia, and NYSE in the United States. And in 11 markets in the G20, more than 20% of the top 100 issuers have male-only boards. And we'll look beyond the G20 as well with some regional data in the next slide. So here we go. Here's the regional overview I mentioned. You can see Europe leading, followed by US, Canada, and Africa, then Southeastern Asia, Eastern Asia, Latin America, and Western Asia. Apologies, these slides are a bit slow to load with the cool visuals, but give me 1 second here. So for our deep dive today, we'll look more at Europe, which, as you can see, is more focused on France, UK, Sweden, Germany, and Switzerland. You see only 2 regions have an average over 30% on the last slide with Europe and US Cans. And I will note here something we'll talk more about again is it's significant because it's been heavily researched that at least 30% representation is required for fair power distribution and for the less represented group to be heard. Now, we've included data for both Europe and Western Asia for today, since we realize the companies joining us today kind of span both regions. So we'll look at both now. And as mentioned, we're conducting our 2025 research. So please stay tuned where we'll include Central Asia and Eastern Europe specifically. So keep an eye out for that. So as mentioned, you can see Euronext leading the way with 44%. And then we'll very briefly look at Western Asia. We see Turkey leading the way for this region with 17% board seats held by women. And the good news is here for out of those 5 markets also improved year over year. But we also see a big issue within this Western Asia group, 59% of firms have an all-male board, which is, of course, far, far too high. So with that, let's discuss what you might think could prevent a company in your region or market from advancing on these particular metrics. So if you could type in the chat what you think might be a barrier to preventing progress to see more women in leadership positions. So take a few seconds, or maybe you have an answer right off the top of your head, but what do you think are some barriers for women in the workplace and achieving, say, those CEO, CFO, executive leadership roles or various leadership roles, even if that's maybe, senior management, for example. So what do you think could be some barriers? As you think and put in some answers, I'll say that those could be something related to HR, or it could be something related to professional development. It could be less programmatic or institutional, and maybe more something that you think is almost an unseen barrier. So Anita said social norms. Absolutely. Social norms is a big one. Olena, not seeing it as a real problem. Yeah, absolutely. And um, that's definitely a big issue. It's also a big issue amongst men in the workplace of taking it seriously and acting as champions for women where they can in the workplace. Mariana said perceptions about women role and social norms. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Maeve said not enough representation in senior roles. That's absolutely, fundamental to the issue is you see it's almost a self-repeating cycle. If there's not the representation already in senior roles, then it's very difficult to get more representation in senior roles. So it's really tough to break that pattern. Another Mariana also noted work-life balance, and Denzanita also noted corporate cultures. Yeah, so those are all really good answers. So in addition to the structural obstacles faced by women in the workplace, such as unequal regulatory environments, lack of workplace flexibility, so perhaps going to the work-life balance piece, and conflicts between work and family obligations, there's often specific barriers that can narrow women's leadership paths and cause a drop in representation at the top. So this is really where we delve into the complexities of this topic. So I highly recommend reviewing these on your own time. But in the meantime, let's go through a few that were mentioned or maybe not mentioned, and cover them in a little bit more detail. So one I don't think was mentioned was limited availability of sex disaggregated data and inconsistent reporting practices that can make it difficult to measure progress or understand the extent of the gender gap. In turn, that creates challenges in identifying effective interventions to close the gap. So measurement and data is really key, a key part of helping create change in a workplace, so that you actually know the extent of perhaps the gender equality that's occurring in a workplace. I'm not sure if anyone mentioned this, but lack of training and professional development opportunities is a big one, particularly in areas with frontline operational or financial responsibilities that can hinder women's attainment of qualifications. Another one that was touched on a little bit was lack of gender-sensitive human capital management, hiring, retention, promotion processes, such as non-diverse hiring committees, limited use of gender-blind applications, so where the hiring committee is not aware of someone's, or the hiring manager is not aware immediately of someone's gender. So those can lead to decisions based on biases rather than on actual qualifications. I'm seeing what else we didn't cover. There were some good ones there. One we discussed at the start is lack of awareness or skepticism about the business case for gender balanced leadership, which, we think has been very rightly debunked as not being true. Another one is limited access to network and connections. So that can make board and management qualified women less visible to nominating committees. Another one is lack of access to role models, mentors, coaches, and sponsors, which could stunt a woman's leadership potential because they can play a really important role in advocating, championing, and helping women grow in the workplace. And then unsuitable work environments in traditionally male-dominated industries, for example, water utilities, that can make it much more difficult for women to pursue long-term career paths. For example, it could be something physical in nature where there's not women locker rooms for changing out of uniforms or women's washrooms. So there's various elements there as well. And then one that wasn't mentioned is also safety concerns in operational locations and GBV, or gender-based violence or harassment, which could represent serious deterrence to women's professional advancement. With that, it's important to note that achieving a truly gender diverse senior leadership team and optimizing the true value in diversity is about more than just sheer numbers. So while we focus on some numbers throughout the webinar, it's not just about numbers and gaining parity and representation. A key is ensuring that men and women have equal voices and agency once they're in those leadership roles, so that they all can contribute to determining their organization's path forward, whether that's in terms of the finances or in terms of gender equality. So to increase the number of women leaders and prepare them to take on leadership roles, companies have to invest in women. This means attending to the culture and purpose of their organizations, and it means adopting a more people-focused business model as part of an approach that integrates an ESG orientation into all aspects of operations. So if you want to dive a bit deeper into this topic, I can also recommend reading a recent publication from IFC on gender responsive climate governance, which we did share. I believe I shared before. The report looks at why we aren't seeing the level we'd like to see and what barriers are getting in the way. And that report notes what we just discussed on training in the workplace is a key issue, and low understanding of the impacts on business. So I saw Fiona shared that in the chat, so thank you. And then I'll turn it back over to Fiona for the next section.
Great, thanks so much, Landon. So we're going to have a short break soon, probably glad to hear, because we know there's lots to cover. But before we do, I've got a little bit more to cover on the complexity of this topic. And we're going to focus a little bit in this final segment of Prepare on some of the key terms we're using when we're discussing gender equality. So firstly, let's start with what you think of when you think of gender equality. So there's no right or wrong answer here, but if you can think of maybe one or two keywords to share with us, then that would be great. So the next Menti slide, which I've just moved us on to, if you're at Menti already, should be visible to you now, and that lets you have a think about what gender means for you by sharing a few keywords. So I'll give you a second just to have a little think about that before we talk about a bit more detail on some potential definitions. Feel free to share in the chat as well, if that's easier. Okay, someone said opportunity for all. Okay, great. Identity. Social construct. Interesting, yes. Give it a couple more seconds in case anyone else has any thoughts for us. Okay, power dynamics. Interesting. Okay, maybe we'll leave it there, but I think already lots of interesting concepts raised there. And I see Sinidu shared in the chat as well on shaped by social and cultural contexts. Someone said a mindset as well. So yeah, I think it's fair to say lots of different angles to that. So that's really interesting. And I think there's lots of great thoughts in those answers. But we'll now have a little look together at getting on the same page, really, and understanding these concepts. So I think it's also important to talk about here that when we understand the depth of gender, we're not simply thinking about sex as being male or female, but the purpose of this initial exercise is to make sure that everyone understands that gender is not the same as sex, and that gender can differ in different contexts and societies. And this is important because it's not really different sexes we always need when we speak about the value of diversity. It's actually different ways of thinking, different lived experiences, and different institutional restrictions or freedoms. So, whilst the term gender is actually quite difficult to define, as we probably started to realize when we shared some ideas there, this is because it means something different to different people. But we'll get a brief idea here of what's included in this complex term. So, UN Women defines gender as the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men, girls and boys, and as well as the relations between women and those between men. And these attributes, opportunities, and relationships are socially constructed, as I saw someone mentioned there, and are learned through socialization processes. And they are context, time specific, and changeable. So, gender determines what is expected, allowed, and valued in a woman or man in a given context. And in many societies, there are differences and inequalities between women and men in responsibilities assigned, activities undertaken, access to and control over resources, and as well as decision-making opportunities. So gender is a part of the broader social cultural context, And other important criteria for sociocultural analysis would also include class, race, poverty level, ethnic group, and age. So, as such, gender isn't as simple as male or female, and I don't think anyone here thought it was from the answers you shared, so well done. But gender can be influenced and defined based on the nature of certain relationships, based on hierarchies, on history, on context, and on institutional norms. And so, most importantly, when we're discussing gender equality today, please remember that we're referring to equality of the genders, not simply increasing women on boards, for example. So feel free to explore this and other gender equality terms on the UN Women's Gender Equality Glossary, which we have linked to there in the slides as well. So let's dive a little bit deeper now, and I'm sure many of you have heard of the acronym DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. And we're increasingly seeing DEI managers or even teams in corporate organizations that will focus on ensuring an organization's DEI performance. So why not just diversity teams or just equity teams? So we'll dig a little bit deeper here into how these concepts connect and interact and the importance of having all three of these terms as part of the full equation. So firstly, starting with equity. And this is all around ensuring that there's an equitable power distribution among people. And you can think of equity as providing women and men with the same microphone that amplifies their voices to the same extent so that everyone can hear them equally. So many might be thinking, well, this is the objective, isn't it? Well, not quite. It's just part of the picture. So let's say, for example, that our objective is equity or equal power distribution, but there are no women in the organization to fairly distribute the power to. So there's no one to pick up the microphone, as it were. And so this means we, of course, need to also focus on diversity. And diversity is about ensuring representation. So the act of inviting the underrepresented gender to join the board enhances diversity of a board. So think of diversity as having enough seats at the table for diversity to be represented on that table. And again, there are differences and different lived experiences that are important to organisations. So it's not enough to have microphones at the table, equity, to make sure everyone can speak at the same volume. And also with diversity, you need to have enough chairs so that a diverse group of participants are at the table and able to speak. And then if we have just these two concepts, diversity and equity, we can have potentially cultural assimilation taking place, where perhaps we expect, for example, women to act just like the men. And then we're going to struggle to keep them on the board, and we won't necessarily be benefiting from the diversity of their perspectives that we're aiming to gain from here. So it's no good to give someone the microphone if they're not willing to speak, or alternatively to claim by giving them the power to speak based on their appearance alone is about achieving diversity. Really, the objective of diversity is to include diverse ways of thinking and diverse lived experience. And so this is why we also have inclusion. And so inclusion refers to the behaviors and practices of making all members of an organization feel welcomed. So giving them equal opportunity to connect, to belong, and to grow. And so to contribute to the organization, advance their careers, and feel comfortable and confident being their authentic selves. So to bring it all together, we can say that diversity is being invited to the boardroom, equity is then having the empowerment to speak at the board meeting, and inclusion is being listened to within that board meeting. But of course, this goes much further than the boardroom and should be considered organisation-wide as well. So overall, the end goal of all of these aspects is equality, which depends on all three of these aspects. So we could have diversity without equity or inclusion, and that's not going to be sustained because those individuals will not feel included and not able to get their voices across. And equally, we could have equity without diversity, and perhaps we won't make any progress then. So when we talk about equality today and in the next session, especially when we're talking about the benefits that it brings, remember that we're not simply looking for equal numbers of men and women on boards or organizations. what we really want is all three of these things: diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so in your handout, there's also some more detail on this diagram, which you can look at as well offline if you'd like to. But hopefully this is a good point to pause and give you a quick 5-minute break, maybe to get a drink or have a quick stretch. So we'll play you a little bit of music on a timer here. So we'll restart our session together once we reach the end of the timer. And in the meantime, if you have any questions from what we've covered so far, do feel free to post those in the Q&A for us, or indeed any comments in the chat. But we'll see you back here in 5 minutes.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had the chance for a quick stretch or to grab a cup of tea. So we'll carry on since there's still lots to get through. But now that we've had the chance to run through some of the initial concepts and clear those up, let's dive into the content again and start with how we can enhance an organization's performance on gender equality. So the next unit is align. So the objective of this unit is to ensure that our practices align with the global best practices and standards, as well as any local or peer practices that should guide your efforts. We'll start by looking at the global principles that companies can use to enhance their practices on this topic. The global standards we're going to discuss today are the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs. And before we go into the principles, we wanted to get a sense of your current familiarity with the WEPs. So if you could let us know with this Zoom poll, is your organization already a signatory of the WEPs? No, or maybe you don't know. So any of those three options. And then if your organization is not yet a signatory, we'll also give you some information about how to become one at the end of this section. So I'll give you a few seconds here to input that answer. We'll try to get a few more answers. So it's always interesting to see this data. I see lots of individuals don't know, so it's always good to check if you don't know, see if you are a signatory or not. And if you're not, it's a great idea, as my colleague will mention, Anna, to sign up as a signatory. So I'll end the poll there. And you see there's a few that are yes, so that's good to see, a couple that aren't. And I see lots of individuals just aren't sure and they don't know. So as mentioned, it's great to check. But we're very lucky to have with us today an expert on the UN WEPs, Anna, joining us. And as was introduced at the start, she's joining us from UN Women today to help provide an overview of the WEPs and to answer any of your questions about the WEPs. Again, just a reminder, please feel free to submit any of your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. But before Anna gets started, we'll play a quick video that introduces the WEPs for you.
Think about the impact of a signature. Think about the magnitude of a global movement. Think about the difference you can make and the power of transformative change. By signing the Women's Empowerment Principles, you can galvanize your shareholders and stakeholders to drive change in the workplace, marketplace, and community through a framework of 7 principles. Brought to you by UN Women and UN Global Compact, the Women's Empowerment Principles are a roadmap for business sustainability, innovation, and productivity. Businesses by the thousands and in every sector are becoming part of this world-changing movement to advance gender equality. Businesses that become models for attracting talent, entering new markets, serving their communities, and measurably improving the bottom line. Because gender equality means better business. Don't miss this moment to make a lasting impact on your employees, suppliers, customers, and investors. Join leading companies already on the journey to greater sustainability and growth. Commit to the Women's Empowerment Principles and make today your organization's signature moment.
Okay, great. Hopefully that's a helpful introduction, but I'll turn it over to Anna now to give us a bit more detail and an overview of the WEPs.
Thank you, London, very much. I think the presentations before that were like excellent introduction to what I'm going to talk about, and the polls results were also excellent because it turns out that not a lot of participants have heard or know about WEBs. So I'll be glad to provide a brief overview. And those 3 participants who already have heard are very, very welcome to paste in, write in the chat what their experience has been, if they have signed up, if they have done some activities. That would be interesting to hear. So what is WEBs? We've heard that there is a big importance. There's growing importance of ESG reporting. We understand why gender equality has growing importance and interest. And then sometimes we ask ourselves, okay, we know we're like stock exchange, we're a private sector company, but how can I contribute to the, how can I contribute to the work? What can I do from my perspective, right? And that's a question we get very often and that's a very normal question because we understand something, but we don't know how to act. So here's why we have WEBs tool. At UN Women, we call WEBs as a practical guide on how to integrate gender equality into business strategy, operations, and we look at it from 3 prisms: workplace, marketplace, and community. So as a private sector company representative, you can do actions which will impact your workplace, which will impact the marketplace you're operating, and which will impact the whole community through WEBs. Take WEBs as a holistic framework, a menu to say so, that will help you as a company to advance gender equality. And then, of course, it's not only advancing gender equality, but also driving positive outcomes for the business and society, contributing to sustainable development goals, especially goal 5, but also other goals. You see on the slides the map of the world. This is, and the video was mentioning WEBs movement, right? This is over 10,000, now 11,000 signatories in over 190 countries all over the world, which have already joined WEBs. And we have over 2,500 signatories in our region, Europe and Central Asia region, which means that by joining these principles, by signing up, you become the member, part of the global movement, of like-minded companies which want to advance gender equality at the workplace, marketplace, and community. So let me give you a brief overview of what is WEBs. These are 7 principles, as I said, like menu, roadmap, however you want to describe it. We have 7 principles, and if we divide into 3 big portions, one part of them address how company can advance gender equality at the workplace. And for this, we have principles 1, 2, 3, 4. So everything on the workplace. And then how we advance on marketplace and community, principles 5 and 6. And the 7th is how we report, how we share information. The very principle 1 is focus on CEO leadership, because the experience has shown that if the company management, the leadership is not on board with WEBs or advancing gender equality by the company, then the work becomes difficult. So the principle 1 is focused on how leadership commits to WEBs. And then also the first action to sign up to WEBs is to reach out to your CEOs and inform them about WEBs, ask them to sign up, but also make sure that not only your CEO, but the whole leadership team is committed to making changes, advancing gender equality. Next 3 principles focus on workplace, as I said, and you will see these principles are that all employees should be treated fairly without discrimination. We should ensure that health, safety, and well-being are ensured at work. And then the company should ensure that there is education, training, and for career growth. And all these principles, of course, are aimed to advance women's empowerment, but good workplace is equally good for everyone, right? So this contributes to overall well-being of the workplace, to say so. Sometimes we get questions, right? And if you have some examples already in mind, please share with us. But sometimes, okay, we understand the principles, but what does it mean in action? For example, there was a bank in Spain that noticed that men were advancing more quickly because they worked late, and women were leaving earlier because of their family responsibilities, right? In our region, we know that in the countries which are joining, women perform at least around 5 times more care work than men do. So they had to leave it earlier. So this was hindering their career growth. To level the playing field, they introduced the policy that office closes at 6 p.m. It closes for men, for everyone, right? And this helps to create equal opportunities for career progression. And by the way, this is from Spain, but we have this similar type of examples from the countries which are represented here when the company introduced a simple but very effective measure. The next 2 principles, as I said, concern marketplace and community. So principle 5 deals with supply chain. So first we ensure what's happening in our workplace, but then we look at the supply chain, like how does our supply chain look? Are we ensuring that supply chain is also gender responsive? And also very important aspect is marketing. Like how do we make sure that marketing which our company has is not discriminative, but on the contrary is empowering and does not reinforce the stereotypes, but supports gender equality, right? So this is principle 5. And principle 6 is like how we ensure that we engage community, how we consult local women and girls, how we ensure that whatever CSR activities, for example, we implement truly benefit these women and girls. And finally, principle 7 focuses on measuring and publicly reporting. We've mentioned ESG reporting. Some are not doing ESG reporting, but are doing other types of public reporting. So we're doing our best to make sure whatever great examples of the work you will produce are widely shared and disseminated across the globe. Because as I said, this movement has over 11,000 signatories up to today. It's growing every day. And we want to make sure that your good work is heard everywhere. Now, briefly, to talk about how the web's journey looks. This is like web's journey circle. This movement entails journey. So we start embarking on this journey with a signature. Signature is a online done process. The CEO statement of support is a template which the CEO signs up and uploads online, which is like quite straightforward and easy process. But then a company should make steps, right? And sometimes this journey looks complicated because we sign, we activate, we engage our stakeholders, internal and external. We have to collect data and progress, measure, and then, of course, report. Sometimes this from one first description, it looks like a complicated process, but we are here, UN Women offices in the countries where you work to support this journey. We have over 300 ready-made tools. We are every day working to have even more and even more comprehensive tools to support you in this journey. So whenever you decide, please reach out to the local office, reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with our local office, and they can guide you on how to take action. And also very quickly, how to become the web signatory. As I said, first of all, you should be eligible. You should be a legally registered company from any sector. Here, we don't have this issue. All of you are qualifying to become web signatory. you have to log in to webs.org, and there's an online form which needs to be filled in. And so far we have 35 stock exchanges already registered, already signed up to WEBs, and already are signatories. And we really hope that very soon all stock exchanges will be, of course, including the stock exchanges which you represent, and their partners will be part of the WEBs process. Where we meet with stock exchanges annually is Ring the Bell. I'm sure all of you has heard about this initiative. And this is like one of the activities which is aimed to raise awareness. But of course, there are much more, as previous speaker Landon and Fiona were saying, like sustain stock exchanges and financial sector can make huge impact on gender equality. That's why this work is very, very important. And partnership with all of you is very, very important part. So for more information, you can visit webs.org. And I'll come back, that's all by now, but I'll come back with some additional information a bit later. And if you have any questions in the meantime, Fiona just shared the link to webs.org. If you please paste in chat and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, for that overview. It was a great introduction to the WEPs, and we recommend that all of those who are looking for a first step on this topic, you can start by working with your leadership to become signatories of the WEPs for those who aren't yet. And for those who are already WEP signatories, which are more and more every day, we wanted to flag that you can consider taking an additional step. And this next step is looking at EDGE standard certification, and highlights in this slide highlights a bit of an overview where you can take a further step by having your gender equality practices certified by EDGE. They provide a certifying service that can help you take your practices to that additional step further, and also provides a clear communication tool to show the market that you're a leading company on gender equality. And we'll have a member of the EDGE team joining us at our next session for part 2, so we'll hear more about this then. And I'll turn it back to Fiona for the next section.
Great. Thanks so much, Landon and Anna. So that brings us into the local side of alignment, as we've talked about. So we're going to look here at what could be considered based on your location. We've talked there about some of those global initiatives that you could join. And so one of the key factors that should be considered based on where your company is listed, of course, as well as where your main operations are, is regulation. So let's discuss what we're seeing here from a regulatory perspective. So on this slide, we can see a number of markets where there's some kind of gender quota or requirement set for listed companies. And this is from a previous SSE report. On the right, you can see the current status of gender diversity on the boards of companies in these markets, and as well the percentage of female board chairs and CEOs. And so one question we often get asked is whether or not quotas or mandatory requirements work, and if this should be implemented in a country. And this is a hotly debated topic. It's obviously something we've already mentioned a couple of times today. But if you'd like to dig a bit deeper into it, you can review the extra slides we've included in the handout presentation. And this provides some insights from a recent study by the UN Principles for Responsible Investment about gender-based quota policies. But as we've seen in the data that we discussed today, sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't. So why is that? Well, while it's not entirely the reason, potentially a part of this is because it really depends on how the company implements these quotas and what actions are taken by the company and how such a rule or regulation might be interpreted by its stakeholders. So we're going to come down to the company level now to see what this means by how a company implements it and do a little exercise together. So to do this exercise, we're going to discuss 2 hypothetical companies. So we're going to call one of those Peacock PLC and another we're going to call Owl Inc. And these are, as you probably guessed, entirely made up companies, but the discussion we'll have is based on their decision-making processes and it is coming from research on real companies. And so in this example, we're saying that both of these companies have currently got only 10% women on their boards and in executive leadership, but both have parity or around an even split between gender at lower level positions. So it's clear here already that women aren't getting up into those higher level leadership roles. And they also have another thing in common. They've both just had a change in leadership and have had a new CEO join. And so let's say that both CEOs are expecting a new regulation to come in. So they're preparing for a mandatory rule relating to gender equality. And the new CEO at both companies are both passionate about gender equality, and they want to achieve equality at the top of the companies in their board and leadership positions so that they can be included in a gender equality index, which will give them more exposure to investors that value gender parity. However, this is where the similarities end. And actually, here we're going to look at the fact that these companies take two different approaches towards achieving this goal of gender equality, and therefore have different results as a consequence of that. So let's discuss their two approaches and what they do. So we'll talk that through together, and then we're going to have a think about what we think that might mean for their different outcomes. So if we start with Peacock PLC, so as I said, they've got a new CEO and they've set a bold target of 40% of women in leadership positions in 2 years from now. So a big step up from where they're currently at with 10%. And so to help achieve this 40% target, the CEO has made a big announcement to staff and they share their experience of climbing the ladder and using this example to encourage other women to follow her, the CEO, to the top too. And they also set a hiring freeze of any men until the target is reached, unless approved by the CEO for her extenuating circumstances. So some employees are perhaps feeling excited and empowered as a result of this, but some women are potentially scared that there's now pressure that they either need to move up the organisation or out. And of course, some men who are now subject to a hiring freeze will have job security concerns. So the overall sentiment that's been created by these targets could be a mix of excitement and fear. And so now let's have a look at what their competitor, Owl Inc. does. So Owl Inc. also has a new female CEO, and they've committed to gender equality in leadership positions as well. However, instead of that 40% target and hiring freeze that Peacock PLC adopted, the CEO of Owl Inc. decides to join the 30% club. And if you're not familiar with this, the 30% club calls on its members to commit to at least 30% female representation on boards and leaders. 30% is a key figure because they see this as the critical mass at which minority voices start to become heard. So they do want to surpass this 30% and try and get higher than this. But the CEO is not sure of the root causes of perhaps their current issues, and they're confused maybe why some women aren't moving from operational level positions to leadership positions. So as a result of this, she sets up an internal task force to try to find out what these root causes are that might be preventing their organizations allowing women to climb to the top. And the CEO also initiates a reverse mentoring program. So they said already that 50% of their workforce are women. So why aren't they leaders learning from them and hearing their experiences already? So a reverse mentoring scheme can really allow leaders to benefit from a more diverse perspective at the operational level, which can also help interested staff in progressing their careers as well. Okay, so we've heard about a few of the different initiatives that both organisations were undertaking there. So we're going to go back to Menti now and take a minute to rank those different activities that we've heard about as to what you see as potentially the most effective or the least effective measures. So some of the strategies that we talked about there were setting a 40% target for women, sharing personal examples of the roles. So in the case of the CEO at Owlink, using her own career path as an example, initiating a hiring freeze for the overrepresented gender, joining the 30% club, or creating a gender equality task force, and also a reverse mentoring program. So I'll give you all a second in Menti to have a think about how you would rank those activities from the most to the least effective, and then we're going to have a look at what you ranked them as together and have a bit of a discussion around this. I don't want to share the results too early and influence your decisions, but I'll share Menti now so we can see what the responses are as they're starting to come in. But do feel free to think about your own answer and submit that from your tab that you have open first before you look at this, so we don't influence you too heavily. But I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to have a think. I see we've had just 3 people take part so far. It'd be lovely to have a few more people participating and sharing. So do try to take part as well. That's always good to see what you think. Okay. So maybe just a couple more seconds before we review this together. Did we get 1 or 2 more responses perhaps? Okay, let's go with that. So it looks like we're seeing the reverse mentoring program coming out as the top option. And I think we already talked a little bit there about how that could be quite an effective initiative to, potentially implement. And we're seeing a little bit of movement here, but we're seeing also joining the 30% club and creating a gender equality task force coming out as the other 2 points. So I think both of those are really good starting points. And I think really having those role models as well as we talked about can be really good to see, since often we know that if women don't have effective role models, this can't be positive. And so I think probably in relation to what we talked about, a number of you have maybe ranked the hiring freeze as perhaps one of the lesser effective measures. And of course, we can potentially see how this could be a bit dangerous, since it could demotivate men in an organization without seeing the whole picture of what's happening. So overall, we don't know why women aren't being promoted without looking at the root causes. So I think this is where we've seen those things such as the reverse mentoring program and the task force will be great ways to really get to the bottom of what might be happening there. And when we're talking about this idea of maybe having targets or quota, we also see that maybe setting a target of 40% women, it might suggest quite a high ambition, but actually we'd probably say that unless it's accompanied by some of these other actions and initiative, it's unlikely to be successful on its own. So it's really important that if you are setting targets or having numerical values, that you're making sure to back that up with the qualitative programs that are going to really help to drive forward the actions needed internally, and that you're getting to the root of what's driving those different numbers. Okay, Brill, thank you everyone for sharing. So we'll have a look now back at our case study of the 2 companies, and in this case study example, we'll see how it worked out in practice for these 2 companies. Excuse me, slight delay. There we go. So if we look at Peacock PLC first, so as a reminder, these were the organisation that had taken the approach of setting a target and being quite ambitious with this hiring freeze, etc., but quite target driven. So what we saw here from Peacock was then that they had some immediate progress after setting a quota, but because they didn't identify the underlying root causes, they didn't tend to see as much success in promoting women, because they were demotivating men in the organisation, giving them less opportunity to grow and less security. And what they also didn't realise, because they didn't do any analysis, was that there were other issues that were present. So, for example, they had some issues in their workplace culture, the benefits available for women, some of the unconscious bias. So as a result of this, it took a long time for them to fill these positions, and sometimes they weren't necessarily getting the right candidates. And external hiring to fill positions, it wasn't necessarily effective. So overall, we saw that although there was some culture change in the organization, there was also a higher turnover level, because there was, more risk and instability and concerns around that. So ultimately, this had, some negative consequences. So whilst there was great intentions on the CEO's part, because they didn't really get to these root causes, they weren't able to effectively address the issue. You might be able to guess where we're going here, but in the case of Owl Inc., we saw that they had similar ambitions as Peacock, but they went about it quite differently. And so it's important to note that the approach that Owl Inc. took was likely to require them to invest more money upfront and more resource. But we hope that as a result of that, we would expect to see a better overall return on investment. So they took a much more holistic approach here and realized through the analysis that they did in the task force that if they wanted to benefit from the changes in their organization's leadership, they would have to not only accept the changes in who was in positions of power, but they would also need to tackle specific issues within the organization that caused the lack of diversity to begin with. So by creating this task force and having the reverse mentoring program, they could identify some of the more specific barriers. So that could be, for example, relating to inflexibility in working arrangements, bias benefits, or a lack of support for certain genders to be able to succeed. But they were able to change the leadership culture through the mentorship program, and that opened eyes then to the value of diversity in decision making. So as a result, this company, Owlink, took this approach, saw more innovation, since diversity was leading to more pushback and new ideas, and it pushed the leaders really to think in new and innovative ways. And they also saved resource in the long run because they didn't have to invest as much in external hires and recruitment as Peacock did for its turnover. So this could also then mean that they had more to continue to train and educate their staff members and to overall shift their culture. So hopefully that was helpful to work through a little bit of a potential example of how that could happen. So we've talked there about culture a little bit. In the interest of time, I won't go into this in too much more detail, but it's just to really note, of course, that corporate culture and the potential deeper issues relating to this are incredibly important to get to the heart of. So we won't, as I say, dwell on this, but I would recommend maybe reviewing some of this detail in the slides, and we'll also share a bit more on this in our next session together. But a useful point, I think, to reflect on with that example of how culture might have played a role there. Okay, so to wrap this up, we're just going to do another quick poll. So I'll launch that for you now. There we go, just make sure I get the right one. Just to get a sense really of what this might lead to. So how can your company improve its financial performance? So thinking about which of these different initiatives could really contribute to improved financial performance based on maybe what we've heard so far, or just what your thoughts are on these issues. So I'll give you just a few seconds to respond to that poll before we review the results together. Okay, just a couple more seconds so that we can keep to our timings. I'll end the poll there and I'll share the results with you. So most of you have selected options 1, 3, and 5 there. And indeed, those would be the ones that we would definitely recommend as most connected to supporting improved financial performance. And it's important to emphasize that having all 3 of these things together and not just one of them is critical here. So for example, if you just have targets, but you don't have the policies to ensure that women are supported and you're not collecting data to understand the root causes, then you're likely going to miss something. And so, yeah, just encouraging you to take a holistic approach to think about equity, as we talked about there, and the different aspects of DEI that need to be thought about together. Okay, thanks everyone for taking part in that. So that brings us up to peers and peer practices. So we've looked there at the global and local levels, and we're now going to focus on the level of companies and look at some peer practices. So to kick us off here, I'll hand back over to Anna, who's going to add some colour to this discussion. So thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, let's bring some examples because what we have heard is very interesting, and let's see how it works in practice, right? So, as I said, we have over 11,000 companies in the global movement, and then I want to bring some examples how it works on workplace, marketplace, and community. For example, a company in South Africa implemented a strategy to increase women's representation to 40% across all senior level organizations, right? And for this, they set up a women's leadership development program. So usually these are like different types of curricula, including networking, training sessions, visits, exchange, mentorships, so very comprehensive programs. And then they had a very specific action plan and with a clear goal and steps. And very soon after the launch of the program, the company exceeded its targets and reached 41% of women in senior level positions. So yeah, just an example of how whenever you have a goal, set a goal, and have a clear actions how to move forward to it, it's doable. Another example is, for example, a bank in Sweden wanted to tackle the gender pay gap of its 16,000 employees in 4 countries, in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Sweden. And they put in place a job evaluation system and kept it updated regularly. To understand the pay gap, it's very important to collect data, right? So I don't know if any of you is collecting this data or looking at the salary differences between men and women, but if you don't, that's a very important tool. And as part of WEBS, we have this tool. And for this company in Sweden, it was very critical to understand what makes roles comparable to one another and how equal pay can be measured. And so they succeeded in eradicating, minimizing, decreasing the gender pay gap because they measured and monitored and reported on a regular basis. If you're interested to work on the pay gap tool, again, reach out to us. We have a measurement tool and can guide you how to use it. Some examples from Marketplace. There was a financial platform in US, and they wanted to increase lending to women entrepreneurs, particularly those who had small businesses, to enhance their economic resilience and independence. They established a dedicated fund, which was focused on improving access to capital for women-owned businesses and also reducing cost of borrowing. And as a result, they committed to ensuring that approximately 40% of their annual capital allocation would be directed towards women-owned businesses. This example is also very relevant for our region because the cost of loans is usually quite high in our part of the world. So now we have several very successful examples when companies ensured to either decrease the interest rate or create a fund. Again, there are a lot of examples, but considering the time, I will not go into a lot of details. There's an interesting example of a bank from Palestine, which has been supporting women-owned businesses to improve financial inclusion for women in the country. And they provided financial awareness and banking literacy training to women-owned businesses. Again, this is also something which can be easily replicated in your work on your respective countries. And before I finish, let me show you a couple of resources. Usually when companies join, they sign up to WEBS. We recommend them to, as a first step, to run the self-diagnosis tool. So to check where you stand with WEBS implementation, where do you have strengths, where you have weaknesses. It's like self-assessment. You do it yourself and you diagnose your self-diagnosis. Then there is a gender action plan module. So you can work on the specific actions on how to advance this work. And then we, as I said, mentioned previously, we had over 300 tools, like how to make sure that recruitment is gender sensitive, right? There's a recruitment checklist, like there is a tool. You give it to your HRs, and then you make sure that the company does not make any mistakes when the recruitment process is done, right? And the recruitment process is gender sensitive. Then, for example, we have a gender responsive procurement tool. Again, very practical. On the WEBS website, you log in, and with your procurement team, you'll see if your procurement is gender sensitive or not, or if it's not, how to make it gender sensitive. We have DI policy guides, we have mentorship guides. So a lot of very interesting tools, which usually are quite expensive if you contract like a consultancy company, but this is all free of charge, developed by top experts for web signatory. So again, if you are interested and you want to move to web sign up and join this movement, you can go to web.org, which was shared early, and reach out to us. So we put you in touch and guide you throughout this journey. I'm stopping here. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Anna. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Just want to make sure we have a good amount of time for our guest speaker. I'll be introducing now, Harry, but thank you so much for taking us through that. And I know those resources will be super useful for everyone to take a look at. So again, you can be sure to look at those on the WEP's website. So with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker joining us from Bloomberg, Harry Agomba. So big thank you, Harry, for being here with us today. And over to you for our deep dive into gender indices. Just to say, I need maybe 1 minute or so at the end, so feel free to take your time as you would usually.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. I am just going to take over the screen share. Hopefully everyone can see those slides now. So thank you very much. My name's Harry. I have been with Bloomberg for about 3.5 years now, working on our Gender Equality Index and Gender Equality Scores product. So I just want to take you through a little bit of a training exercise today to sort of show you the sorts of data that Bloomberg captures and that Bloomberg clients, kind of, i.e. largely investors and other corporates, are looking at in the gender equality space. So you can see there's a quick agenda there. I'm just going to take you through some background first, and then we'll get on to the main part, which is the training exercise with real world examples of that data. So while you take a read through the slides, I'll just take you through a bit of history about how Bloomberg has dealt with gender equality and scored it. So we started off as a survey back in 2016, which was initially only offered to, I think it was 25 or 26 US financial companies only, so like basically the biggest 25 in the world. And the last year that we ran the survey was financial year 2021. At that point, it had grown to just under 700 companies from all around the world, which was an opt-in logic. To maybe 18 months ago to 2 years ago, we decided that to get gender data to a wider audience, we needed to move away from a survey model and move to a public reporting model. So what we have done now is move to capture publicly reported data using all the expertise from the last sort of eight or 9 years of running a survey, doing that. So as I said, we're now scoring over 3,000 companies based on public data. As part of that, we carried out a very open engagement process with companies that had filled in the survey on the data that they felt proud to report, as well as feasible to share publicly. And we've really only just launched a score sort of, within the last few months. So it's a very early stage of corporate awareness. Our scoring methodology is freely available, and it's definitely a good opportunity to get ahead of the curve. And, if you adopt these metrics and report them publicly, it's a good chance to score well, because so much of it is based on disclosure. So that was a quick summary of everything we've been doing the last 2 months, as fast as I could. Now we'll move on to the case study. So what I have here are 2 companies, and we're going to go through their sort of mystery data, and then at the end I'll ask you to guess who is who. So the first company is Louis Vuitton. The second company is Under Armour. They'll now be known as company A and B. And as I said, the poll will be at the end. So firstly, just think about some of the high level biases you might have, which is obviously okay to have. You've got a fashion company. You might think that, typically it will cater more towards women employees, and a sportswear company that might not. Those are all things that, people have thought and put in chats before, so it's fine. And now we'll take a look at data and how they can actually challenge that initial perception that people may or may not have. the first thing I want to show you are the ESG scores of these companies, specifically the S and the G score. One question that I get a lot is, where does gender fit into ESG? How does it fit in? How does diversity and inclusion fit into ESG? The answer that we have come to is that it's really its own entity. So we have these social scores, we have these governance scores. You'll see that there are themes that sort of fit within that, which I've picked out here. So we've got supply chain management and basically board composition. But really gender is so sort of nuanced and detailed that we really need to treat it as its own data set and its own score, which is why we have done, and we have our own separate score for that now. So now we are taking a deep dive at data within the gender score. So in the first table, you can basically see the various level of women throughout the company. So you can see that company A has more women in the total workforce. It has more women in middle management and senior management. But then as you get more towards the executive level and the board level, it can drop off. You can also see that total promotions is not disclosed by both companies, and attrition, which is basically the percent of leavers who are women, are also not disclosed, but company A does disclose new hires. So that is basically what we call our talent pipeline, is in there. It's showing the representation of women throughout different levels of the business. In the second table below, we show some of the benefits that we try and capture. So parental leave retention rate. So that's the percent of parents, which is gender agnostic, that come back from parental leave having actually taken it. That really assesses the culture around parental leave, whether or not it's acceptable to take, and how, and any benefits that might be in place to welcome people back. We've got flexible work benefit, which is obviously becoming more common since COVID. And then the backup family care benefit, which is obviously a really important thing as parents adjust to coming back to work. Should they have childcare provisions, but also for caregivers as well, which is a role that, traditionally might fall on women. Is there any benefit there and support from the workplace to look after people? So that was very quick because I know we're very short on time. Having looked at all of those data, I will ask Landon to run the poll. Who do you think is who? So we'll have a quick recap. Basically, company A has a bigger representation of women throughout the company, but doesn't disclose any benefits they might have. Company B has slightly fewer women, but has a lot more benefits in place. There we go. So who do you think is company A, Louis Vuitton or Under Armour? We'll give it maybe 10 more seconds. Any last answers? Great. So usually this ends up being quite 50-50. This is definitely one of the better responses we've had. Most of you have got it right that company A is in fact Under Armour. Oops, I've gone to one slide too many. Company A is in fact Under Armour, so 67% of you have got it right. I'll just close off with this quote: "You can't manage what you can't measure." We've had a lot of feedback from corporates that have engaged with these data points that the fact that we're asking for them to be disclosed means that there is actually one of the first times that they're trying to measure these data points, and it is helping them manage it by doing that in the first place. And the last thing I will close out on is I'll send some links in the chat for anyone who's interested in sort of formally engaging with us and looking at these, disclosing any questions you might have and anything like that. So thank you very much. I will hand back over to Fiona.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Harry. Super useful as ever to get a bit of a real life example of how Bloomberg are using this data in practice, and the meaningful differences we can see and approaches there. So really appreciate you taking the time to share us with that. And as you say, nice to see many people guessing the correct option there. Okay, perfect. So this is bringing us just up towards the end of today's session. So in the interest of time, sorry, I'll keep the mentees quite quick, and I've just moved on to the second mentee exercise we have here, which is just to give us your sense of where your current kind of level of comfort is against those areas that we started with at the beginning of the session. So we hope that you're feeling a little bit further along that scale now as to where you're at with your understanding. And I do see, I think from the one person who's got back to us so far that they're now feeling very comfortable, so that's good. But yeah, we'd love to know from a few more of you what you think on that front. And of course, it's quite a short time frame until we have our next session together on Monday morning. So no need to spend your weekend entirely engrossed in the concepts of corporate gender equality and capital markets. But if you do want to have a little reflection as well, we do encourage you to think from what you've learned today, what are you immediately feeling you'd like to take forward or to understand better in your organization? Perhaps it's to join up and look into more detail about the WEPs. Perhaps it's to do something like setting up a reverse mentoring program or starting to explore the data that you already have. So good to have that little reflection. But yeah, I'm seeing quite strong scores there in terms of the comfort levels of everyone from today's training. So fantastic to see that progress. So a couple more slides from my side just to cover to close out the session. So I'll just take us back to the presentation now. So firstly, it's just a quick reminder that we know that you're taking a lot of time out of your busy schedules to be with us when we do this training. And so after the second session on Monday, you'll be eligible to receive your course completion certificate. So if you join us together on Monday, you'll be able to get that certificate. So please do join us then. And then just to say from today as well, we've thanks for sharing your contact details in the chats as well, Anna and Harry. But in the slide handouts, you'll also find the contact details for the different teams. So feel free to reach out to us. And a big final thank you to Harry, particularly for joining us to share his perspective from Bloomberg. And of course, a big thank you to all of the supporters at the SSE Supporter Network of Exchanges and other organisations who support this programme. A final closeout of thank yous would be in particular to Anna from UN Women for joining us today, for Elena at the IFC, thanks Anna, and of course a big thank you to our four host organisations today, our 3 stock exchanges and the CGPA team in Ukraine who brought us all together. And of course, lastly, a big thank you to everyone who's joined us in the live training today. We hope you found today's session helpful, and we're looking forward to seeing you again for the part 2 session on Monday. So wishing you a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.